We have Dr. Jack Kruse on the show today, and he is a neurosurgeon and somebody that I'm super excited about to have, speaking with us here today. So, Jack, thank you for coming on the show.
No problem.
You are in El Salvador right now, which I'm jealous of. I'm actually in Massachusetts. We're just coming out of winter, and one of the most difficult parts of the year for me specifically, especially after I learned about your work. This is a photography channel, and, but I like to think that the community that I have here, we talk a lot about theory and philosophy of photography. It's less about, camera gear and, falling victim to marketing tactics and things that people are trying to sell us. So community that I have here are real thinkers. And I think that your message is extraordinarily important nowadays. I have had a profound change in my health since I found you about a year and a half ago. And after years of abusing myself through technology, which I really didn't know that I was doing, when I came across your work and I had my changes, I have just been extremely fired up to get you here to spread this message to a community that may not have heard about it yet. So, I want to jump in by speaking about some of these statistics. This is the United States specifically, but we can extrapolate this to the whole world. Approximately 1 in 10 people in the United States are on an SSRI drug. 40% of the population will develop cancer. 1 in 36 kids will be diagnosed with autism. 41.9% of the population are considered obese with a BMI above 30. 22% of children ages 2 to 19 are obese. Roughly 90,000 new Parkinson's cases every single year. 61% of adults are expected to have some form of cardiovascular disease by 2050. And 41 million adults have diabetes. I am fucking pissed off about these statistics, honestly. This seems to me like our country is completely falling apart, and everybody wants to focus on food or a lack of supplements or something like that as the root cause of this. But now with what I've learned through your work, I realize that this is a distraction or a diversion. So I just want to basically start off by asking Jack, what is wrong with our current environment?
A lot, but you have to realize that the truth has been obfuscated by the people that started this. And that's like the hardest discussion to have with people, because when they're asleep and they don't know they're asleep and they don't know what they're addicted to is the thing that's actually causing those numbers. It's a really tough discussion to have. Like when you sit down with an alcoholic, and there's a bottle of Jack Daniels sitting on the bar, everybody knows what the problem is. If you are in a pharmacy that just got looted by a bunch of, pill heads, everybody knows what the problem stems from. Here's the interesting thing about this silent war that we're having in the United States. It's caused by a silent weapon. And the problem is, because it's caused by a silent weapon, nobody seems to be able to put their finger on it. And then a guy like me, who's been doing this for 20 years and telling people a very consistent story, how shall we say, the photograph changed about 2 years ago when I stepped into the limelight and started talking to the movers and shakers of the world about this very issue, about actually the genesis of where this problem began. And when you take people back to the Manhattan Project, people kind of stop. They go, what do you mean? This goes all the way back to 1945. And I said, well, that's when science in the United States was stolen by the Department of Defense and also by the corporate structure of the United States. And they learned the lessons in World War II from the Manhattan Project. Why? In 2 years, they built a bomb, which all of us know about, but it was the largest engineering project ever. They harnessed scientists from all over the world, and they were actually able to pull off something that to be quite honest with you, if Vegas was taking odds on it, people would have said probably not. And because of that success, the process that science used to pull that massive engineering feat off was then basically brought right into all different versions of science. And unfortunately, and this is the real unfortunate part, it also entered the world of medicine. And that is the reason why we have a huge problem in centralized medicine. So the basic problem is they silo scientists. So they put them in different silos. So this would be like the way for you guys to think about it as photographers. It's trying to come up with an awesome picture, but you're not able to put red, blue, green, yellow, and purple together. It's almost impossible task to do. But the reason why the system is built this way is because of the success of the Manhattan Project. So after the Manhattan Project's done, most people know that there's this group of people that come and get invited back into the US military in 1959 or 58. That's DARPA. It turns out the same people who formed DARPA outside the government were the same people that were involved with this Manhattan Project. So when you begin to see that, you can see that the infection spread because, believe it or not, Eisenhower was the guy that got rid of this, how shall I say, virus, because that's what it was. And the leader of that virus was a guy named Leslie Groves. And Groves ran the Manhattan Project. He's the guy that hired, all the scientists in that project through a program called Operation Paperclip. And I think most people these days know about the movie Oppenheimer. They've probably seen it, but in that movie, you never get to see the stuff that we're talking about here right now. The real nefarious part of this, and this will show you just how crazy this story is the gentleman that Groves relied on to go to Europe to poke the right scientists, mainly physicists, that were involved in the brand new field of quantum physics, were a lot of Jewish scientists from all over Europe. His name was Alan Dulles. And Alan Dulles started to corral all these people and bring them back. So one of the key things that happens later, but I guess we'll talk about it now because we're jumping around a little bit. Because of this help that Dulles gives, the people who try to make Dulles feel indebted, the DARPA people indebted, it's a group of people that go on to form Israel. And the key saying is, look, you took our Jewish scientists to make the bomb. So now we would like you to give us help back to get the bomb. So we're not going to go into the full effects of this, but this problem, I think everybody who's listening to this knows that this is going on still to this very day right now. I mean, we just had the JFK files released. People know, an inconvenient truth, the truth that I've been telling. I've gotten pretty popular on social media in the last 6 months, specifically because of that part of this story with the Danny Jones podcast. When, Danny famously said, well, I don't think these guys are a part of it. And I said, oh, trust me, not only are they a part of it, they're one of the major architects. Well, now that cat's out of the bag. Everybody kind of knows it. But the story that you're asking me, how does this lead to the numbers that you read at the beginning of the podcast? Because, this looks like a random walk through Jack's head or history, but it's really not a random walk. All of these things are indelibly linked. And for you to see the photograph properly, you have to have the right perspective. I think yes. Your group would probably understand that quite well. And what happens next, DARPA begins to hire scientists in post-World War II on things that they're interested in. One of the things that happens that is, it's almost like, I would say, quantum entanglement, but it's a very interesting story. During the war, Groves, and most people know that the Manhattan Project's called the Manhattan because it started in the Empire State Building in New York. It had to be moved. But the question is, why did it have to be moved? Most people don't know this part of the story. Well, it got moved to the desert because there was a lot of complaints and rumors that the Germans were sending U-boats into New York Harbor because they knew that Alan Dulles poked all these Jewish scientists that were all physicists, that were all interested in nuclear physics. So the Germans knew what the deal was. So Groves told FDR at that time, hey, look, we don't have enough manpower because we're fighting, two fronts, both in Europe and in the Pacific, to patrol the docks of New York to find out, is this really happening? So Groves comes up with the magical idea. Well, the mob controls the docks in New York. Why don't we go talk to the mob and see, if they'll be patriotic? So the government, specifically FBI, CIA, go and talk to the guy that runs the docks. The number one guy that runs the docks was a guy named Lucky Luciano, but he was in jail at the time. So his proxy was a guy named Meyer Lansky. And Meyer Lansky and Luciano, through history, are linked. Meyer Lansky is the famous Jewish accountant banker that was the accountant for Murder, Inc. Lucky Luciano is the head of Murder, Inc. And what happens there, the government tells Lansky what their concerns are, and they ask for help. And Lansky says, okay, I think we can do this, but you have to do something for me if I'm going to help you. And what was the help? The help was, I want you to get Lucky Luciano out and from a maximum security prison to a minimum security prison so he can help me run my business. And magically, the Department of Defense makes that happen. And that's discoverable by, savages today. So the key thing that happens right after that is Meyer Lansky's really successful with General Groves' request. He finds a whole bunch of spies, I think total of 19. He kills them all with the exception of one guy. And it turns out it's a surgeon from Nazi Germany named Plotkin, and Kurt Plotnik. And he tells Lansky this craziest story that the Nazis are using Mexican peyote to see if they can mind control people and all different kinds of other things. And Lansky's like, I don't think I'm going to kill this guy. I'm going to actually deliver the information, to the federal government. And the government is very happy that, these guys find and confirm the rumors, but they actually sit this guy Plotkin down and start talking to him. And they find out that the Nazis have this huge mind control program.
Yes.
Ongoing, and they don't know anything about it. And this guy gives them more and more information. So at this time, this is pre-CIA, because remember the CIA comes in 47.
Yeah, it was the OSS at that point.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. OSS and ONI are the two branches of the War Department, and they decide to study this stuff. So the study goes on and on and on. Well, that Lansky becomes famous later after the Cuban Revolution, like when we jump forward to 59, his partner in the Jewish mob is a guy named Mo Dalitz. Mo Dalitz is very famous for being one of the key architects of Las Vegas. Most people know that one of Lansky's really good friends is Bugsy Meyer. Bugsy gets killed by the Murder, Inc. guys because all the money that they spent in Vegas, the casino's not doing well. So literally, I think it was an hour after that hit goes in the Beverly Hills Hotel, Meyer Lansky and Mo Dalitz go into the casino, and the first thing that they do is they paint the windows black. They offer free buffets. They take the clocks off the wall, and then they start to change all the light bulbs. And they also bring one-armed bandits into the casinos. Why does this happen? Well, it turns out that guy that Lansky found on the dock with all the work through the ONI over this now, it's almost 12, 13 years, they find out that light has a huge impact on the way people behave. And what's happening through the whole 1950s is we now get the CIA in 47 who begins to study this. The first crazy thing that the CIA does that was part of MK Ultra, but then flipped out, was the art world. Most of the people who are interested in artwork, like you guys probably are, all modern art was basically a psyops by the CIA to front it. And that's where they used sort of launder money. So, for example, if you've ever seen Carl Lichtenstein's painting in 1963 of the sunrise, it's very, very modern. It's, for me, it's not my taste, but that's the type of artwork that they sponsored. They went around all the famous museums at the town to push this stuff. But Lansky starts pushing the issue with what he's learned from this new program that the CIA starts. They rename it. It's called MK Ultra. The guy who's running MK Ultra is a guy named Sidney Gottlieb. And then Sidney Gottlieb takes some of the ideas that he learned from this Nazi surgeon and starts doing it, huge operations on us. So one of the most famous ones that was discoverable for MK Ultra was they basically dropped LSD out of a plane, a U.S. Navy plane in St. Louis. When I was on Rick Rubin's podcast with Bobby Kennedy, we had talked about that. And, a lot of people were surprised at that in 2023, that they didn't know this history. I said, well, there's a lot of things you don't know about the MK Ultra program. Yeah. And then you also have to know that the MK Ultra program, once they moved from wires to wireless, then to light, that's where the story got really interesting. And, and I detailed all of that on Danny's podcast. For people who are interested in it, there's a guy named Delgado who is a researcher. He spent a lot of time in Mexico, Spain, working with some of the people down in New Orleans. And he basically put wires in bulls' heads to see if he could change their behavior. He did that. Then he did wireless technology, and then he began to use light. And then they moved from bulls, and they went through the mammals. And eventually, of course, they got to us. They did some of these prison experiments in California, people that were locked up. And then once the program got sophisticated enough, then it was moved to the Stanford Research Institute. So SRI becomes MK Ultra. So what do you need to know as a savage in all this time? Remember, our health metrics are starting to go bad. This is when we're moving out of the industrial economy in the United States and we're headed to the information age and technology. This is the beginnings of solid state physics. This is the beginnings of Silicon Valley. We're talking 50s into the 60s. We still don't have Intel. We still don't have Microsoft. We still don't have, hard Apple technology. Right. We don't have any of that stuff. But we're building the infrastructure to completely retool the economy. So what happens next at Stanford Research, you have the comorbid, and I use that term very, very intently, of technology, healthcare, and this retooling of the economy. And you begin to find out that they learn very, very quickly that they can use light to program people. So the idea is to get screens in front of everybody. So you're probably not old enough to know this, but the original computers that came out in the early 80s used to have VGA screens, which were green, lettering and numbering, not blue. And the screen looked like, an old TV tube.
Oh, I do. I do remember seeing those. Yes.
Right. So that was the first and second iteration of some of those computers. And I remember when I was a kid, back in the early 80s, one of those computers that had ridiculous, so little power would cost $11,000, $12,000. A decade before that, the supercomputers of IBM, they were millions of dollars, and they filled rooms, and they had to be air conditioned. So you could see what was happening is that shrinkage and Moore's law was happening. And then what was happening in society? We were getting the technology and slowly getting addicted to it. So how did they merge this idea? Stanford Research Institute was critical in changing the screen technology. So what did they do? They made everything blue lit. So now here comes the hard stop for everybody. Why they pick blue light? Now that was the work of MK Ultra. That was the work of SRI. Why don't a bunch of Americans who heard the numbers that you read out are furious with their iPhone and iPad. Well, the guy that was Alan Dulles' protege, named Richard Helms, destroyed all the files for MK Ultra in 1973. Okay? Because he became the head of the CIA. Now, he did not know some of those files still persisted. That's how we found out about things a little bit later. For example, in 1977, Senator Frank Church from Kentucky put on the Church Commission. And that was a very, very long commission. There is where we learned about MK Ultra. That's where we learned about the gun that could give you a heart attack. That was electromagnetic. It's also where we learned that the CIA had 400 operatives in the media. It's where we found out that Walter Cronkite and Dan Rather were two of those people. We found out a lot of information that you would have thought at that time would stun people, but people back then did not realize what DARPA's ultimate plan was to actually take the idea of Kurt Plotkin and use it on their own population at scale, 360 million people. We're building pieces and parts. Remember I told you about the siloing of different things. So in the 1960s, late 1960s, a guy named Alan Fry comes onto the scene. He does some very interesting work for DARPA. He's very famous in the world that I'm in, but with a good connotation. Why? Because he was never canceled from DARPA. But what did he find? He found something called the Fry effect. The Fry effect is that you can use pulse microwaves and you can actually get voices to show up in your head. That's what he's famous for with people who are targeted people. But the real thing that he found that was most interesting to a guy like me is that you could use non-native EMF to open the gut barrier, the brain barrier, the barrier that you have between your eye and your retina. All you had to do is use non-native EMF. Remember I told you, silent wars, that you have silent weapons, so you'll have no way of knowing it. So when the government gained the ability to open up the blood-brain barrier, something very interesting happens in the world that very few people really know about these days. Remember, the people that had the same technology coming out of World War II were the Russians. And the Russians tried to warn the United States that if you started to use the low end of the electromagnetic spectrum on people, that bad things could happen. It got so bad that the Russians sent a delegation to Sandoz nuclear lab to tell the people that were worked after the bomb. These are the people that were part of the original deep state. These are General Groves people, that this problem exists. Of course, you know that the military said these guys are full of shit. We're not going to believe them. They're Russians. We're supposed to hate them because that's what General Groves told us. And it was very frustrating. This meeting happened in 57 through 58. So what did the Russians decide to do? They built this huge antenna in Ukraine, and they start sending out this frequency called the woodpecker frequency. You could hear this the whole time I was growing up. When I was a kid, it worked on the same latitude as, I believe, Portland, Oregon. It would just send this chirping message. And when people learned about this, they were like, why are the Russians doing this? This was the Russians trying to warn the United States military and the people in the United States that you're making a big mistake if you do this. For you guys as photographers, understand that, Russia doesn't have an Apple. Russia doesn't have a Google. Russia doesn't have Facebook. You got to ask yourself why when they have the same technology. I mean, it's a very reasonable question to ask when you're a savage. So the next thing that happens is probably the most shocking part of the story that I haven't talked that much about, but the Russians decide to really send a message to the United States. They then use a pulsed microwave device to shoot at the U.S. Embassy in Moscow. So we have 3 straight U.S. ambassadors that come down with a blood cancer.
Wow.
At the time. And then everybody that was in the Moscow embassy started to complain about horrible problems with tinnitus and Meniere's disease. And no one at that time in the United States could figure out what was going on. So eventually, the physicists that are part of DARPA, turns out it's this guy, and Fry tells the military exactly what's going on. Eventually, they figure out how to fix this. Now, you're going to laugh when you hear this, but you know that the idea conspiracy theory is actually a term that was coined in our lexicon by the CIA.
I have heard that, yes.
About the JFK assassination. Did you know that tinfoil hat comes from this event?
I didn't know that, but I'm not surprised.
Guess what the result was? The DARPA came up with the idea to line the entire inside of the Moscow embassy with tinfoil to block the effect.
And did it work?
Yeah, it actually did work. And you have to remember, it worked at that time because they weren't really using high frequency stuff. They were trying to send a message that if you use this on your population, you're going to create a huge problem for the world. Okay. Mm-hmm. So for people who don't believe this story, you can go back, look in the Federal Register. In 1973, Henry Kissinger gave everybody who worked at the Moscow embassy from 1967 to 1973 hazard pay. They got 30% more pay for working there. So that is where Havana syndrome first comes. But where's the name coined? The name is coined because Obama used that down in 2008, 2009 in the embassy down there. Turned out it was the Cubans that used it on our embassy. This was now, remember, communist tied to Russia, still trying to send the message to the United States. What was happening in 2008, 2009 that stimulated Castro to do this? They knew that the SRI was moving to the Brain Health Initiative. Guess where the Brain Health Initiative was going to go? To Central and South America, where brown and dark-skinned people were. Why? Because what did the government find out at SRI? People that are heavily melanated are not as susceptible to electromagnetic devices as they should be. So the government said, we need to study this. That was why this all went down at the time it went down, okay? So now, you know, I don't know how old you are, but you look like you're in your mid-30s. You have lived in a world that is now filled with these devices. You know, these are not devices that are targeted at you. These are devices that you hold in your hand. You have computers. This is how we talk with me in El Salvador, but they're ubiquitous. Just so you know, the number that you didn't read on your list to me that needs to be added, each idiot in the United States on average owns 12 devices that emit RF or microwaves.
Wow.
Okay. Did you know that?
No, I did not. And that's shocking.
So here's another thing. You mentioned something about obesity, about how everybody's getting obese. Do you know that every 10% increase spending in tech money, that the NHANES data for obesity goes up 10%?
Yeah, that's absolutely incredible. And
so guess what? Here's the thing that you need to understand. The data is discoverable, but remember who I told you about who we're dealing with. We're dealing with the Department of Defense and DARPA. So they've done a really good job with your generation. Remember, I'm a graybeard. I'm in my 60s. You're not. I've seen the fucking nefarious things they've done. Okay? What you don't realize is that they've been doing this on everybody else. Then they stopped in 2008 when Obama came in. Then Obama decided, okay, now we're going to turn this on our own people because we're going to find out if this really works. Remember, this is where ideation without execution leads to deletion. So Obama, the idea starts from Meyer Lansky all the way to SRI, but Obama's the guy that decides to execute the program to see if you really can control a population. So what is the major idea that I want you to understand? The things that the Department of Defense, NATO, and DARPA want you to believe about Russia are the same things that are about them. They're communist, but we're using electromagnetic devices to control and harness the cows in the United States. Doing it with weapons you can't see. See, at least Putin, people know who he is. Yes. There's no silent weapons with him. But our government is waging a silent war, utilizing weapons that we don't understand, and they're doing it by design, and they've addicted you to it. Why? Because the light frequencies that they use marry up to the non-visual photoreceptors in the human body. And that's also work that was done at Stanford that they found. Eventually, just so you know, all of this is codified in DARPA. It's given to Google, and then it's also given to companies like Facebook. All of these are DARPA companies at the origin.
Okay.
So now
this is exactly what I wanted to talk about to set the stage here, Jack, because just for me, what I've realized is, I went through my health problems about a year and a half ago. I got to a tipping point to where I started experiencing, I was, deadlifting 400 pounds. I was in the best, thought I was in the best shape of my life. Totally fine. But I was spending a ton of time in front of screens. My office was in the basement. I wasn't connected to nature. I was staying up all, hours of the night on screens, all that. And I hit a tipping point to where my body started to deteriorate like crazy. Thank God I came across your information. And I remember, I will never forget this day. I was listening to one of your videos and I was laying on the floor in one of my rooms in my house. And I felt like I was dying, literally. My arms were burning, pain. I couldn't walk up a staircase without feeling like I was about to have a heart attack. I had pain throughout my body. I had twitches in my muscles. I had all the brain fog, all these things going on. I was laying on the floor and I was listening to one of your interviews. And this particular room, I had houseplants in this room. And I was laying and listening, and I was looking at one of the plants. And as you were speaking about the light, it clicked for me. And I was like, holy shit. If you take one of these plants and I put it in a dark room, or I put it in front of a screen or something like that, I take it out of its environment, nature, it's going to die. It's going to get sick and it's going to die. And that was the beginning of it. So now that we've established that we've established the history and how DARPA and, the technology companies are involved in this, I'd like to talk about what actually happens when a human is in their natural environment, AKA outside. We can talk about what happens when they go inside and they're addicted to technology, but in the natural environment where a human is optimized, what is actually happening when you go outside, light hits your retina, goes in your eye, or hits your skin?
Well, let's keep on the track that we're on, because I think you're going to like where this goes, because we're going to hit that. So remember I told you about Fry. Fry's the guy working with DARPA, figures out how these effects are. Here's what you don't know. At the same time, being funded by DARPA is this other guy named Robert O. Becker. Robert O. Becker is an orthopedic surgeon in New York who's actually doing some amazing work for the government on limb regeneration for soldiers that are coming back from Vietnam. His model is a salamander. He goes through frogs. He eventually is twice nominated for the Nobel Prize. DARPA funds him. He's probably the most famous scientist at the time when I was a young man, okay? He goes on TV, 1977, and tells the world that this antenna that the government wants to build called Sanguine in Wisconsin to track nuclear submarines is dangerous. Then he takes it a step further. He goes, in fact, the power lines that are in your backyard are actually dangerous for you. Now, remember, nobody owns a microwave or a cell phone yet. That's going to happen literally 5-6 years later. He goes on 60 Minutes and tells them the world this. Literally, his lab is defunded and right away. DARPA
Holy shit.
puts them on ice. So what I want to explain to you is Fry teaches DARPA how to take humans apart. Becker is teaching the world how to put them back together. And who do they cancel? They cancel the guy who has the answers for you laying on your basement looking at the plants. Got it? That's the key part of this story. So after Becker gets canceled, the science gets more developed. Here's where it gets interesting. To know what we're supposed to do, you have to understand a little bit about how we're built. So between probably 1998 and 2017, the non-visual photoreceptor system, which I think you guys will dig because you're all photographers, gets discovered. Which turns out the rarest color in nature, and I'm talking about things that are alive, is blue. What should you know about blue from the biologic standpoint, not the photography standpoint? Claude Shannon came up with the information theory in 1948. He said, basically, for a message to be precise and powerful, it has to be unusual. This is the reason nature doesn't use blue very commonly. So if you listen to the Reuben Huberman podcast that I did 2 years ago, Huberman tells the story of one of his friends named Nicholas Burson, who is sitting down with him in California, in Stanford, says, you guys are not going to believe this, but we just discovered that we have amphibian blue light detectors in our brain. And, Huberman kind of chuckled and laughed, and I'm looking at him, I'm like, makes total sense to me. Why? Because the story I just told you, Becker used what? Salamanders and frogs, and then graduated to humans, okay? But Huberman didn't seem to know the evolutionary history of how amphibians and mammals are linked. And I thought that was very, very interesting in that podcast. So once we find that melanopsin is the blue light detector, we find out it's in the brain. What do we find out over from 98 to 2017? It's in our arteries. It's in our sub-Q fat. It's in every single tissue we look for it.
So you're saying, Jack, that we have actual cells, not on just our skin, but inside of our bodies, which technically shouldn't see any light, that are detecting.
Well, they don't see light, but they absolutely respond to it. So, for example, the ones that you guys will be interested in are the ones in our retina. They're called intrinsic photoreceptor cells. That's the melanopsin cell. Those are the ones that actually control your circadian rhythm. They also go to another place called the habenular nucleus that controls the new territory in humans, which is the frontal lobes. So that's the key. Those are first order neurons that come through your optic nerve that go to those two way stations. Just remember that. The story gets more interesting because when we find out that this blue light detector is everywhere, but blue light is rare in nature, you actually begin to understand what nature is really doing, okay? Then we find out, 2009, we have a UVA detector on our cornea, and then we find out it's in our skin. Remember, the dermatologist and ophthalmologist have been telling you your whole life the sun is toxic for you, right? But yet nature put a UVA detector everywhere along your integument. Kind of shocks you. And then we start to learn about a little bit about melanin. How do we learn about melanin? Well, melanin is something that most people know about in the skin. They don't realize that mammals do something interesting with melanin. They internalize it in their brain, and it turns out it absorbs all parts of the electromagnetic spectrum, which is the reason why I told you they went to South America. The other interesting thing about it, and this is something that you can discover yourself, DARPA became very interested in melanin for what's their front reason, the facade, not the stuff that I'm telling you. It's the best thing to use for solar panels when it's dehydrated. Why? Because it communicates you turn light into an electric current. Nothing on the planet works better than melanin. So they're now trying to work on this in the ISS. That's the front for DARPA using all this story. But there's something more nefarious because it turns out the regenerative current that Becker finds in 1967 is 1/1,000,000th of 1 amp. That takes a red blood cell and turns it into a de-differentiated cell that's a stem cell that fixes you. Now, here's the interesting part. How does this work? The red blood cell has to be turned from oxygenated hemoglobin to something called methemoglobin, because that's like a step back in time. Then what actually happens? That methemoglobin, through this current, 1/1,000,000th of 1 amp, then gets turned into a fetal red blood cell. You may not know this, but when you inside your mama, when you were hypoxic, your red blood cells had mitochondrial DNA. And it turns out that's a key part of regeneration. Because if you think about pregnancy is like turning a germline, an egg and a sperm, and then you come out as a 9-pound baby. And it turns out the program that you think is really, really bad, called cancer, is actually what forms a baby through this process. It's controlled. Why? Because of the part you didn't learn about Becker, because of DARPA. So this is the part that gets really interesting. Becker comes out and tells people, this is now 1970s, as I told you, I think it might be a bad idea if we put all this technology and power line stuff around humans, because I found 1/1,000,000,000 of 1 ampere actually allows us to tap our stem cells and regenerate. Well, the reason DARPA didn't want that information out, my friend, is because we know what takes you apart. Now we know what puts you together. So what are we going to do with technology? We're going to get rid of it. Okay. So now let's go back to 2008. What's the single most nefarious thing that Obama does in his first term? He signs the proclamation that we're going to get rid of incandescents and go to LEDs, which have a huge blue spike. He tells the world, the facade story, the DARPA story, this is to save energy, okay, because we're subtracting out the UV and the infrared A and the light. We're just going to make this blue and you're going to be fine. Then he does something even crazier. He allows Big Pharma to start to advertise on TV. Why is that? Remember that whole church commission thing, that there's people in the media that are working for the government. Now you have Big Pharma able to pay the salaries of the people in media, so that now the government has a propaganda arm that works indirectly, just like an NGO would, to actually sell people the story, propaganda. Because remember, when their brains don't work because you're using light at them at scale, what eventually happens? You got them in prison. You're living in Massachusetts and you think you're free, and you have the illusion of being free. Now the system is very close to being ready to go at scale. 2008, 2009. Okay? We go down to Brain Health Initiative, and then they figure out a lot of different things with this program. But the two events that I want to bring you back to before we go outside and teach you how we're supposed to work, two events happened, both of them with African Americans. First one is in the Navy Yards in Virginia, where a guy comes in, on his rifle is carved ELF, extreme low frequency. He goes in with that rifle and kills 12 people in the military. You never hear about this ever again. Why?
Never heard. Yeah, never heard about that.
Right. But you can still look it up and find it.
For sure.
Then a couple of years later, a black attorney with no history at all goes in back into his college at Florida State, shoots the library up, doesn't kill anybody, but he swears that he's hearing voices in his head. Same thing as the guy in the Navy Yard. In other words, you're now beginning to see they are testing this on us.
Yes.
And you don't know it. And they're doing all different things around you. You got towers around you. You got satellites. You got everything.
And Jack, sorry to interrupt, but for people that might find this hard to believe, I really encourage you to go look up the original patents on the iPhone and the technology from Apple and see how DARPA was actually involved in that technology and creating it.
Correct. That's one of the key, when that phone came out, that was one of the key metrics to make sure that you had one of these devices in everybody's hand. Why? Because the EMF they were delivering to you was not only blue through the screen, RF and microwaves. And just to make it even simpler, because I know you guys may not know this, when the iPad came out, Steve Jobs famously said in his book, yeah, I created all this cool stuff, but I would never let my own kids use it. Why? Remember how he died. He died from a retroperitoneal cancer. He's the guy that put in our lexicon laptop. He's the guy that every time you saw him give a talk, his jeans, the Levi's, had where he put the phone. These are the two areas you radiate in between them. That's how you get a cancer. And I don't think Jobs knew. Let me tell you how I can prove that he knew. So iPad 2 comes out, and you can go and discover this right now. there is an infrared detector in the iPad. Do you know why it was put in? Jobs absolutely said it needs to be put in because if this device touches the skin of a child, it should turn off.
Wow.
They never marketed this technology. Why? Because if you knew about it and why they put it in, then you'd start going, well, is this device healthy for me to use?
Right. Exactly.
Got it?
Exactly.
And you know how Apple is about marketing. So this will tell you how complicit these people are. And I will tell you, you guys look at Steve Jobs, as an icon. I look at him as a fucking terrorist. Okay. Why? Because he was complicit. And now this technology has been turned on us.
Yes.
He's one of the guys that allowed that. Same thing as Paul Allen. Paul Allen also died from one of the blood cancers, just like the guys, the 3 ambassadors in the Moscow embassy incident. Exact same cancer, just so you're clear.
Incredible.
So now to get to your question, what do you need to learn about when we go outside and we're not in your basement with your hands hurting? What's the difference in that light versus the light that technology uses? We are optimized for that light tremendously. Almost every single key protein in us from the Cambrian explosion, when I say us, I'm talking about eukaryotes and all of our friends, are heme proteins. The best heme protein that I think all of you know, since you're not scientists, is hemoglobin, okay? So I want you to think about hemoglobin in a red cell like a radio antenna. It looks like a bagel or a Bialy, and it's basically a radio antenna for the sun to communicate with your mitochondria. That's how I want you to think about it. So I told you the story of Becker about how he used in a broken bone a red blood cell de-differentiated. Remember, when he said this was considered impossible in biology at the time, that there's nothing in biology that goes back in time from a previous atavistic form, meaning this is literally space travel. You're actually doing something that biology says can't happen. Well, he proved that it can, and you don't know about it because the military doesn't want you to know about it. That's why he was canceled. So when you go outside, what do? You make more red blood cells. Your blood cells are perfect. When you stay inside, like the day that you were down in the basement, your red blood cell atrophies. It's no different than when you go to the gym. When it atrophies, you get a disease called anemia of chronic disease. To this day, you open any book in medicine, they have no answer for what caused that disease. I'm going to tell you what it is. It's a lack of UV and IR light. Turns out heme proteins, their action spectra are UV and infrared, sometimes near infrared. Red blood cell is very interesting. It's mostly red. It's got a sharp cutoff at 600, but it goes all the way down in the UV. So that means hemoglobin, which is considered a porphyrin, just like chlorophyll is a porphyrin, is a UV and IR detector. What's the key for you understanding Becker's work? UV and IR light are the key to the regeneration programs. That is what Becker really found. So guess what? DARPA found if we bring non-native EMF, blue light, into the environment and take away the regeneration part of the program,
we're screwed.
We got everybody. So what I'd like you to do now, go back and take a look at your list that you started this with. That's the cause, because you have no way to regenerate any of those things. That's the reason the numbers are there. And that's the reason the numbers are getting worse and worse and worse. Why? Because you are addicted to all the shit that's around you right now.
Jack, you are dropping a massive, massive bomb. And I really hope that everyone's listening to this, because this might be extremely hard for, if you've just come across this information, for you to believe. And it might take you actually going outside like it did and changing your actual environment for you to understand this, not just words. Because for me, when I felt like I was dying, I went to the doctors, and one doctor told me that I might have MS. Other doctors were just throwing supplements at me. I went to a functional health place. They just did nothing but take my money. The only thing that worked was me waking up before sunrise, standing on the ground with my shoes off, watching the sunrise, and then spending the majority in as much time as I possibly could outside with as little clothes on as possible. And
So
my
message about being the Sphinx.
I'm sorry, what was that?
I said you got my message about being the Sphinx.
Exactly, Jack. And this is what I'm saying is, I am so fucking pissed off is because one of the reasons is I got a pair of blue blocking glasses, and I wear them at night when I'm driving. And one of the things that just incensed me is I was driving one night and I kind of pulled the glasses down just past my eyes. And all of a sudden you see that we are enveloped, completely covered in a mist of blue light at all times.
24/7.
Exactly.
It's not just nighttime light. Like the people that are in control of DARPA, the people that are in control of Stanford, the people that are in control of the academia of the science world, they want you to believe that, oh yeah, blue light maybe at night's bad. Blue light's bad fucking all the time.
Yes.
And the only blue light you're designed to get is blue light from the sun. Why? Because the antidote in the sun is red light. Remember, blue light never shows up without red light. And that's the key of why you begin to understand how nefarious Obama was, because he took out UV and IR light so that you would never have it. That's what was in an incandescent bulb. That's why when you guys were little, you touched the bulb, you burned your fucking hand. With an LED light, you can change it no matter what. Yes. Because there's nothing.
There's no heat.
Creating is heat. So when you begin to understand that if we had incandescence, the numbers that you read probably wouldn't be as bad. But you have to realize you're a young guy compared to me. When I went to school, we had the windows open. We used to go out for gym. Now we didn't. We had books. Now everybody's got screens, and they got Wi-Fi, and they got cameras fucking everywhere.
Right.
Got it?
Right.
So when you're a parent and you're sending your kid, remember, Department of Education is a government place. You're sending your fucking kid to Chernobyl every day when you understand their science. Then when the kid comes home, what do? They run straight in their bedroom to do video games, or they're on TikTok. Kids don't do anything anymore. And the problem is parents don't realize they've been conditioned for this. I grew up, this environment is foreign to me, okay, as an old guy. And what you need to realize, young people are listening to this, the first thing that they do with kids, they give them a digital babysitter, which is
put a screen in front of them.
Exactly. Because guess what happens? The baby's brain has no myelin. It is absolutely the fastest way to addict a child when you give them these devices. It's exactly what DARPA knew. This is the reason why they were behind all this technology. They were behind Google. They were behind Facebook, behind Apple. Every screen is blue lit except the one screen, that I helped get to market, which is the Daylight computer, which is one of my members' sons built a computer that can be used in the sun, where works spectacular. The problem is guys like you that are in your industry, they don't even know this computer exists. Why?
Exactly.
Because Sergey Brin has been trying to get rid of it. In fact, the most ironic part of that story, Sergey Brin and all his friends at A16Z and Google try to bury this kid's work. I had to wait until Sergey and Nicole Shanahan got divorced, and I sent Anjan to Nicole Shanahan, and she gave him the money to start this computer company. Why? Because she had her own come to Jesus moment, after dealing with me about the stuff you and I are talking about. Why? Because her daughter is on your list. She's one of those kids that got autism from her daddy.
Incredible. So, okay. So let's just to recap here. This is so important here. So basically what you're laying out here, Jack, is with the lighting that's indoors, we are being assaulted by a certain type of wavelength, a very specific type of light. If you walk into a room,
435 to 470.
Okay. So that's specifically what the light is. When you walk into a room nowadays, the light might look like what it does outside at high noon, but you're not getting a huge part of that natural spectrum. And what is cut off is the part that's actually regenerating the damage that is caused by blue light. So go ahead.
You got it. That's that. When you ask me the question, Jack, what's the difference when we go outside and not? You just nailed it, my friend.
Perfect.
In other words,
So
all the regeneration program that Becker found has been subtracted by your government, and they're forcing you to live in that world. And their friends in, where's the Cantillon effect? My world, big pharma, in centralized healthcare. The number one driver in every single city in the United States is cancer care. I don't care what hospital you're in. Well, guess what? They know that. And if you listen to the interviews, I don't know if you guys heard this. Hopefully, after listening to this, you just heard Howard Lutnick talking Shamath yesterday about how the government should be involved in healthcare solutions and monetizing it for the United States. Dude, let me just tell you something. These guys, they are the biggest fucking criminals.
They are not our friends.
They are
not our friends.
No, they're not. None of them are. And I'm telling you, I always have to remind Americans this, especially your age group, because you guys fucking suck at history. Just remember that the crazy misfits from the UK came over here 250 years ago because of a 3% tax on fucking tea. They shot at the king. So guess what? You listen to the story that I just told you. This is ridiculous that we're taking it. And the reason we're taking it is because you've been MK'd ultra by light your entire life. They know, they can actually tell you what they've done, which they just did by dropping the JFK files. You now know who really did it, your government in Israel, and they still know you won't care. You know why? Because you got your Netflix, you got your screen.
Exactly.
Your dopamine level and your melatonin level is so destroyed that your neocortex can't think by first principles. That's how much they know they have you.
Exactly. And it's so obvious once you wake up out of the sleep and the hypnosis, it's so obvious that the ubiquitous thing that's around us all the time, which is our lighting, is the thing that's actually making us sick and disconnecting us from our natural health and our balance. So now that we've established that the technology that we're using, we're all addicted to, has been coming from DARPA. Okay, you can go look up the patents. You can go look at where the iPhone technology, all this stuff came from. Now you have to open up your mind and understand that this is all on you individually. The person who's listening to this needs to understand. A lot of people ask me why I have the Gadsden flag as, my icon for, my social media and stuff like that. And part of it is because the snake is an ancient symbol of creation. But the other reason is because that represents people who didn't want to live like fucking zoo animals. Okay, it's not just the taxes. It was people who wanted to be in control of their own destiny and didn't want to have the level of control by somebody else outside saying how they should live.
Well, just use the term with your tribe so they understand. This is a decentralized mindset.
Yes.
And it means that you're into self-sovereignty. It also means that you're into strict property rights like alloidial title, which is the other part of this story we haven't talked about yet, but that's what Bitcoin is and what nature is.
Yes.
There are two decentralized networks, one manufactured, the other one natural. If you understand that flag that you use on your social media page, this is the mark of the decentralized mindset. People who think by first principles, we're autodidacts. We're not going to listen to the narratives that we're given. We're going to go and we're going to dig till we find the root cause of the problem. And then we're going to take the root and pull it out of the ground. So when you want to know why Uncle Jack is here, it's not just because the 13th latitude has great weather, great sun, good water, and good magnetism, because we live on top of a volcano, but it's also because I don't want to be next to people who are watching this video. Why? Because you think that what I just told you is hyperbole. It's bullshit. Everything I told you in this video is discoverable, and you can fact check it yourself. If you're a savage, if you're a decentralized thinker, first principle, you're going to come back and watch this video 5 times, 6 times, 7 times. Then you're going to go look at my other videos and you're going to say, wow, this guy is a neurosurgeon who was talking about health for 18 years, but something happened 2 years ago that he's now telling the world this story. You know what that something was? Messenger RNA technology. Why?
Yeah.
Because what happened in the 1950s in the Cutter event showed up in the messenger RNA technology today. And guess who run that? DARPA.
So these problems are eminent. So basically, we're cattle, essentially. Okay, well, we've been turned into cattle.
I would say not only your cattle, but it's even worse than that. Because when people really listen to my podcast, they're now tapering the Ponzi scheme with the people who were complicit. This is what all the died suddenly stuff's about. This is what all the things where you see healthy, fit people dropping dead. Remember what Fauci told you in the beginning? Fatties with diabetes were going to die. No, that's not true. They're not dying. It turns out it's the fit people. Everybody 2 years ago was watching TV just like I was when they saw Damar Hamlin drop dead on TV.
Yes.
A football player. And another guy, Supreme Health, kind of like you were in your basement, JJ Watt, had to retire his Hall of Fame career because his heart stopped working. He had to have it cardioverted 2 or 3 times, and it turned out the cardioversion didn't work. So he's like, I can't play football because I don't want to wind up like Damar Hamlin. We've had over 250 soccer players die on the field all over the world. Remember, these aren't fatties with diabetes.
Right.
But that's what you're told because guess what? That's what the paradigm wants you to believe. It turns out, believe it or not, people who took the jab who are fat, they have a layer of protection that everybody else doesn't have. Why? Because what did the jabs have? What did DARPA put in the jab? Something called a liquid nanoparticle, a lipid nanoparticle, I should say. So when you're heavy, that particle goes to your fat. There's nothing in your fat that's going to kill you. So the more fat you have, the more you're protected from how this thing kills. Turns out the more fit you are, it tends to go to electrical membranes in organs. So guess what the number one target was in the aftermarket data? They wanted it to be the heart. That's the one you guys know about. But the number one issue is actually the kidneys. Acute and chronic renal failure has gone through the roof in COVID. And you're going to appreciate this, my friend. A guy right in your backyard who you should have on your podcast, his name is John Bedoin. He's an electrical engineer. He has all the data for Connecticut, Massachusetts, 5 other states that will show you that this is true. You guys know about the myocarditis issue. So it turns out that the real story that you need to know about the aftermarket data is if you took it, you are probably going to have a big problem over the next 20, 30, 40 years. If you make it to 40 or 50 years, those are going to be the savages that are doing what Uncle Jack's doing right now. Outside getting what? The UV and the IR. Why? Because that drives the regeneration programs.
Exactly.
That keep you away from what they're trying to do to you. Okay? So this is the single most important thing I can tell you. That the UV part drives the melanin story. The near infrared IR part drives the water heme part of the story. You need those 2 protein systems in your body to be absolutely on call for when DARPA comes to take your life away.
Exactly.
That's what I'm telling you.
So
and that is with food, with vaccines, with drugs, with supplements. Why? Here's the last kill shot you need to understand. Because I told you a lot in this podcast. Alan Fry knew that technology opened your gut barrier, your blood-brain barrier. So what does that mean? When you have processed food, when you have a jab, when you have supplements that have heavy atomic atoms in it, that actually causes immune problems in your gut. So if you want to know why kids are allergic to peanuts, that's the reason why. If you want to know the reason why people have multiple chemical sensitivities or electrohypersensitivity, the open barriers are the reason why. You want to know why celiac disease is spiked? That's the reason why. Do you want to know why Hashimoto's went from very uncommon in my Robbins pathology book up there in 1986 to now the number one cause of thyroid disease? The open barriers are the reason why. And what did they do? They put all these atoms in these things that aren't supposed to be in us. And why is this important for you to hear? Because you guys are all photographers. I know that you don't know the science, but here's the last part of the Becker story you need to understand. Becker's work, the reason why it was groundbreaking, he found out that we use semiconduction in us to work, okay? That bone metabolism has a P and N semiconductor. That's collagen and apatite. We have two copper atoms that sit on there by van der Waals forces that keep those things together. That's the work that DARPA paid for. So he's the first guy that showed every system in us is built around this. So let me ask you a question. When Intel and Microsoft build a fab to build semiconductors, don't they have clean rooms?
Of course.
Do they let anything in there?
No contamination at all.
Why in the fuck then would you take a supplement? Why in the fuck would you take a vaccine? Why in the fuck would you use any processed food that's not built by photosynthesis? Because guess what? Nature keeps all of those things out that can harm its semiconductor system.
100%.
But guess what? They're putting stuff in and at the same time opening all your barriers to these atoms because you know what they know? It destroys the way the semiconductor system in you works and you never get to the regeneration program.
So we're experiencing a loss of energy that normally should be flowing through our bodies, through our cells, because our barriers have been opened by the electromagnetic frequencies that we're being assaulted with, RF, lack of natural sunlight, LED lights, things like that. It's
Correct.
Opening up these barriers and it's draining our power, essentially.
That's exactly it. And what you need is what I got behind me. What AAA is for everybody listening to this video is sunlight. Why? Because it has UV and IR and profit balance. But if you want to know the details, and I didn't think we would get too big into the science, but I can explain it to you very, very quickly. If you look at my fingers right here, this is the wiring diagram for the inner mitochondrial membrane. This thumb here that you see wiggling, that's NAD. That's the beginning part of the electron chain. Over here, this one's oxygen. Okay? Oxygen pulls electrons from here. So this part right here, the bridge, that's a 30 million volt wire. What did nature do? It put a heme protein around this wire that makes deuterium depleted water. Why did it use water that's pure? Because water is a perfect insulator for electric current. So let's do this again. What does non-native EMF, blue light, anything? It does this.
Separates it.
So guess what happens? Then that 30 million current goes
everywhere in your body.
Wherever the electrical resistance brings it.
Okay.
That determines the disease you get.
Oh my God.
Got it? Yes. What fixed this? What fixes this? Okay. You need the IR to keep the water here. Why do you need the UV? Because remember I told you in Becker's work, 1/1,000,000th of one ampere of current. Here's where it comes. When melanin is hydrated, it becomes a poor electrical conductor. So it went from the best to the worst just by covered. So that's how you get to the 1/1,000,000th of 1 ampere. Water and melanin together are your superpower. That's the reason why UV and IR light are irreplaceable for savages who are being taken apart by the list that we started this podcast with.
Exactly. So what Jack is saying here is if you don't go outside, you will never experience the repair mechanisms that were naturally placed inside you over millions and millions of years of evolution. What people have to understand is there are two, and this is from my basic understanding of knowledge, but from what I understand, there's two main sources of energy. It's electromagnetism from the planets, the earth, wherever it comes from, and then the solar radiation spectrum. We've evolved under those two sources of power for millions of years. And yes, you can talk to a dermatologist and they're going to tell you, oh, UV light causes, DNA damage or whatever. And yes, that's true. But there are natural mechanisms that we've evolved that in perfect balance, repair everything. We are in a constant flux up and down of damage and repair that creates a perfectly healthy human. But when we're stuck inside with being blasted by blue light and, all these radio frequencies, this Wi-Fi and all this technology, we're removing the ability to repair ourselves. So we're actually just going to get a million different diseases based on, like Jack said, where that electricity goes. Is that right?
Absolutely correct.
Excellent.
It's actually not that hard to understand the biology part of this, but the real big issue is it's hard to fathom for people that their government would do what they did. But I'm going to remind you today, knowing what everybody knows about these jabs, 1 million children are getting the COVID jab today because nobody's stopping it. So guess what that means, my friend? These brains are not myelinated yet. They are preconditioning future Americans to be subject to their control programs. That's really what's going on. Like, if you look at the most famous quote in MK Ultra from Dr. Delgado, he said, at some day in the future, generals will be able to control humans electronically. That was the original idea that DARPA had in 1960s when they hired Delgado. You now live in a world where they're this close away from getting it.
Yes. Yeah. And you know what? Honestly, it's really not that hard to believe. When you just go outside, go to a mall, go to any populated place where people are walking around, and look at what they're doing. They're like this. They have a phone in their hand and they're barely paying attention to their surroundings. People are
I was thinking you were going to do something better. I think the most obvious thing to wake people up, all of us collectively, 360 million of us, just lived through COVID.
Yes.
If that doesn't tell you what the fucking government's capable of, I don't think anything else does.
100%. I was speaking to my wife last night about this interview, and this has not only opened my eyes but hers as well. And she spoke specifically about that because I was talking about my community. We talk about photography. That's a little bit different. I was wondering how my community would react to it, and I was like, look, it doesn't matter. This is a message that's extremely important. And she said, you know what? After COVID and what had happened with the response and the vaccines, and now everybody's looking around saying, okay, we weren't told the truth. And not only that, we're sicker than ever and things are more screwed up than ever. People are starting to look around, and the people who aren't fully asleep and fully gone are starting to say something's wrong.
Well, I'm going to tell you the real plan here for DARPA to do what they do. You have to cut their energy source off, which is money. So I've told people, when you hear this story, like I've laid out for your tribe, COVID was a compliance test for a coming economic reset. That's really
what's
going on. Why? Because everybody knows the money is failing. The covert money is going away. The dollar's worth nothing. So they got to get to the next big thing. If you want to know what the next big thing is, it's been blocked in the United States, but Europe, Australia, and Canada are pushing forward. They just came out with the CBDC. Remember, when you have programmable money like that, then they can control your money. They'll say, oh, well, look, Scott, you in Massachusetts, you don't have enough social credit points because, you talk to Jack Kruse, and we don't want anybody talking to Jack Kruse. Therefore, you're not going to be able to go to Mexico this weekend.
Right.
You just turn your fucking card off. That's kind of what's going to happen everywhere else in the rest of the world. And here's the bad part. It's going to affect you and me, because say when I get invited to a Bitcoin meeting in Europe, as soon as I get there, then I'm subject to those rules, even though I have an American passport. And here's the thing I worry about. How likely is the American government going to fight to get me back? I mean, we know that they did it for a drug dealing, smoking pot, WNBA player. But I don't know if they're going to do it for a neurosurgeon that's telling the world kind of what they're doing. And when you begin to understand that we have a duty to each other. Look, I'm just going to tell you, if there's one thing that comes from this podcast, once you fact check Uncle Jack and you find out that I'm telling you the truth, just do me a favor with your family. Sit down and get a copy of the Constitution and maybe read it and read a little bit about what Thomas Jefferson said in the Federalist Papers.
Exactly.
And understand that we are being ruled. It's so hard for me to say this, and you're in Massachusetts, so this is really going to land. We are being ruled by the biggest den of criminals you could ever imagine. I'm going to tell you, 250 years ago, we shot at our king. If the king was alive today, the king is better than the people that are in Washington, D.C. right now.
Yeah.
There's only one guy, maybe two. All right, I'm going to give you three. Marjorie Taylor Greene, Thomas Massey, and Rand Paul. The rest of them need to go to Gitmo. We need completely new Congress. And I have to tell you, this is where it's really up to me and you. We're the fucking idiots that keep electing these fucking assholes.
Right. Yeah.
So we need to get rid of them all and start anew. It's like Buckminster Fuller said, if you think you're going to reform a broken system from within, you're psychotic.
Absolutely not.
And I think that's the point that I'm at. Now, I can tell you from the outside in, for the last 2 years, am I that agent provocateur now? Yeah. I mean, you have to realize I was behind Bobby Kennedy. I was behind Nicole. Basically, Maha has become haha. I mean, the craziest part of this story, going into this, literally 3 months ago, I was very confident that Bobby was going to do some really good things. And I was not so sure Trump was the right guy, but I thought he was the right guy for the finance stuff because he was pushing Bitcoin and not the CBDC. Who would have thought in March that I have absolutely zero faith in Bobby Kennedy and I have more faith in Donald Trump because he's pushing forward with at least the financial side, but not the opposite side. So what does that mean? You said something earlier in the podcast that I think needs to be brought back up and it needs to resonate with the people listening to this. You're nobody's coming to save you. It's an equals one game. You guys need to understand that we're all in this game together. The reason I do podcasts with guys like him is he's a tuning fork in Massachusetts. And he's sending out a molecular resonance to me. When we have this kind of discussion, you guys as the audience get to see if we're resonating or not. Now, you may not resonate with this message yet. You may start to resonate when you fact check Uncle Jack and you look into the things that both he and I have talked about. And when you find that's the case, what do I envision the next version of America is going to be when you look at that Constitution? It's not going to be defined by borders. It's going to be defined by a loyal title. All of us are going to live all over the world, and we're going to do communication just like this. We're going to use the thing they try to kill us with to actually build our own country. We're all resonating together, and
Absolutely.
we're not listening to your fucking game anymore. We're not playing by the rules that you had, and then slowly, steadily, we do to them what they did to us. We start taking apart their system. And the number one thing that needs to happen, in my view, is you need to take the money source away. Then we need to get rid of intelligence. We need to ban the CIA, ban the FBI. For people who think that's crazy in this world, let me just tell you something. The FBI was founded in 1908. This is not like some fucking huge long-term story. CIA is founded in 1947. If you ask me which one are the real problem, the CIA is the problem for us now because that's where DARPA came from. The FBI is a problem because it's now protecting all the criminals in Washington, D.C. That's the reason both of them need to go. That's, if you ask me, Jack, if you were my doctor when I was laying on that floor looking at the plant, what would you tell me the prescription was? I just gave you the answer. We need to take our country back. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab you by the back of that white shirt. I'm going to throw you out on the fucking grass and we're going to sit and we're just going to chat. We're going to have probably some deuterium depleted water. I may even give you some hypertonic saline and put a couple of drops of methylene blue in it. So now I'm being provocative with your audience. Well, why is he saying that? Well, if you want to know why I'm saying that, why I'm being provocative, you go and listen to that Danny Jones podcast when you hear me talk about the little girl life that I saved in 1998 and how I did it. Turned out that when Metallica was playing on that loop and whispered in my ear that this is a way that I could help her broken electrical system in her brain and her broken melanin system, that maybe the wisdom from that surgery could help each one of you who are listening to this podcast. Because right now, the only difference between that little girl and you guys is her injury happened very, very quickly with huge intensity. Your injuries happen over your whole life.
Incrementally.
You got it. And you don't realize the same story for her is the same story for you. That's the key. And when you begin to understand what I'm saying, just as you found, when you go back out and you eat like a great white shark, protein and fat, and you connect with the sun and you're grounded, that's all you need to do to get Becker's regenerative program, no matter what your injury is. Now, depending on how bad the loss of electrical resistance is that destroyed different parts of your body, that will determine the length of time that you need to do what you need to do. Okay? My goal is not to make you live to 120, 130 years old. My goal is to get you to 85 so that you're fixing the roof on your house and you fall off. Right. And you're not taking any medicines and you're not relying on people like Dr. Fauci.
And you don't have Parkinson's.
Correct. I don't want you relying on Dr. Peter Attia or Sean Baker or Andrew Huberman's podcast or Joe Rogan's podcast. I want you to have a loyal title of your own health and your own money.
Yes.
But guess what? That's really what it's about. It's about you taking back ownership of your life. And when people tell you that, no, it's not impossible to do in 2025, turn this podcast on again and then go read the Constitution and tell me it's not possible.
100%, Jack. I'm so glad that you talked about the Constitution. If anybody has not read, and so many Americans haven't even read their own Constitution, their own Declaration of Independence, that those documents have nature and the principles of decentralized nature all through them. Those were a highly enlightened people that recognized their connection to nature. And that's where their rights came from. That's where the way that they structured their life should come from. And anybody trying to step in front of that, their life was not as important as stopping that. Okay? So what people need to understand now.
We need to stop.
Exactly. And what people need to understand now is there's a lot of money in trying to sell you supplements. There's a lot of money in going to your doctor and having them send you for MRIs and blood tests and all this stuff. There's not a lot of money in a doctor telling you just to go outside. Okay? And that's the real reason why this stuff is being held back from us, is because they want people sick, they want people confused, and they don't want people knowing what's actually going on. So the basis of everything that we've talked about, if you want to gain control over your mind and your health, you need to get back into nature. You need to get back connected to the principles of what we've been evolving under for millions of years. Get the technology away from you as much as possible and integrate it responsibly, and you can gain your health back.
I agree with that. And I think it's simple. People don't believe it, but it works. Yeah. And I'm not going to tell you that you're not going to need my profession. Like when you break your leg, you have a subdural, from trauma. Yeah, that's what we're good at. We're good at the acute stuff. What we suck at is the chronic stuff. And it turns out what DARPA is targeted is the chronic stuff.
Yeah.
That's what you need to understand. Like all the disease metrics that you started this podcast with, every single one of them are the chronic diseases that doctors are impotent to fix. And you have to realize it's not that doctors are bad people. Their curriculum is paid for by Big Pharma and DARPA, just so you know that. That's why we learn what we learn. We learn just enough so that we don't question some of the things that I taught you about here. Like if you ask most doctors today, and I think your tribe should do this, ask your doctor 2 questions. This is how you know if you're with the right doctor. Doc, do you know anything about the Cutter event? Okay. Then number 2, Doc, do you know anything about Dr. Robert O. Becker's work? in bone regeneration, do a hard stop. If they can't answer those two questions, you're at the wrong doctor.
Totally agree. Totally agree. Well, Jack, I just want to close this out by giving you my sincere thank you. I believe that that you are one of the few people that is rare nowadays that are speaking out strictly from the heart and experience. And we need your voice more than ever nowadays across any community. And my health has changed drastically. I literally feel healthier than I have ever felt in my life, and that includes my 20s, my teens. I have never felt so healthy and clear-minded, and just my vision for what I want in my life and the things that are around me has never been clearer. And it was a very simple awakening from you to remind me to get back connected to nature. And I sincerely want to thank you. And for everybody that's listening, the stuff that we've talked about on this podcast, it might be hard to believe, but go look up the patents of who put out this technology. Look how DARPA has controlled, the technology that's ubiquitous nowadays. And you'll come to your own conclusions with that stuff. But I implore you to really dig in and listen to what Jack has said, and to go in and do your own research and find out for yourself.
Yeah, let's end it with this, because I want to give them something a little bit more hardcore. I want you to read first book, Going Somewhere, by Dr. Andrew Marino. Just so you know, Dr. Marino was the physicist and eventually became a lawyer to protect Dr. Becker. He's the one that did all the experiments with Becker. You'll read all the congressional testimony that was done in the 70s that told you what they were doing. It's in his book.
Fantastic.
So when you read that, you'll be blown away. And then I would tell you to read Becker's book. I think Becker's book, you won't be able to put it down, because you're going to be like, I didn't know that we had semiconductors in us. And then as soon as you get that message, you're going to go, I can't be putting anything in my body or my child's body that are going to ruin the semiconductors that nature has perfected over 3.8 billion years. You get those messages, then you'll understand why the ancients built the Sphinx at the 28th latitude, looking to the east with all four extremities to the ground. That's the message. The message is there. Stick with it. Stop listening to the message from your government. Stop listening to DARPA. Stop listening to centralized healthcare. Stop listening to bankers. Stop listening to Wall Street. Reclaim your sovereignty for your health and your wealth by becoming a decentralized savage. And you'll find out that all it's going to take is you being a first principle thinker. That's it.
Fantastic. Jack Kruse, thank you so much for coming on the show. We very much appreciate it.
All right. Take care.
All right, we're going to end it there. Jack, thank you so fucking much, man. That was absolutely incredible, and it was really the message that I wanted to get across to my community. That was amazing.
No problem. Just let Chantal know when you let it go.
Absolutely. I'll give her a heads up before we're going to release it. And
right.
yeah, I really appreciate the time.
No problem. Take care.
Thanks, Jack.